Dear students, today we will start with the region thorax, and I will introduce you to the thoracic region. And at the backdrop you are seeing the skeleton. What is this skeleton? This is the axial skeleton, and it's formed by the what bones? We are seeing the bones of the thoracic cage, we call it, and this is the sternum, and you are seeing the ribs on either side of it, and these are the vertebra, and you are seeing the clavicle articulating with the sternum, and this is the inlet for the thoracic cavity. This is the outlet for the thoracic cavity. And this thorax, it's a cone-shaped upper part of the body. This is the part between the neck and the abdomen. So, thorax is the part of trunk lying between the neck and abdomen. Now let us see the boundaries of the thorax. You are seeing the thoracic cage, and it is having a superior boundary. This is the superior boundary, which is formed by the jugular notch of the upper border of the sternum. Then there is the joint between the sternum and clavicle. This is the sternoclavicular joint. The superior border of the clavicle. Then there is the acromion process and spine of the scapula. On the back you are seeing, and spine of the 7 cervical vertebra. Spine of the 7 cervical vertebra. So the superior boundary for the thorax is the jugular notch, sternoclavicular joint, superior border of clavicle, acromion process and spine of the scapula, spine of 7 cervical vertebra. Inferiorly, the boundary is the xiphoid process, the costal margin. This is the costal margin. This is the xiphoid process. Then the last 2 ribs you are seeing, 11th and 12th ribs. 11th and 12th ribs. Here you are seeing the 11th and 12th ribs. Then the 12th thoracic vertebra. So the inferior boundary is the xiphoid process, costal margin, 11th and 12th ribs, and the 12th thoracic vertebra. Now let us see what are all the regions under which the thorax can be studied. So one is the thoracic cage. This is the one. There is the thoracic inlet. This is the thoracic outlet, and the thoracic wall with spaces between the ribs called the intercostal spaces, and inside it the thoracic cavity. So we will be studying this thoracic region under these categories. So what is this thoracic cage? You are seeing the bones. What are the bones you are seeing? Sternum, which has got the manubrium, the body, and xiphoid process. These are the parts of the sternum. And then you will see the ribs, which are divided into 2 categories, which we will consider after some time. And you are seeing the vertebra also, and the clavicle and its articulation you are seeing. Same thing the posterior view, you are seeing the vertebra. These are the spines of the vertebra, and you are seeing the ribs, the scapula, the spine of the scapula and acromion you are seeing. So, the thoracic cage is osteocartilaginous. It consists of bones and the costal cartilages. The bones are the sternum, the vertebra and the ribs. And the costal cartilages are the articulation of the rib with the sternum. So at this point you will see the costal cartilages. So the thoracic cage is osteocartilaginous and elastic and conical in shape, and it is formed by 12 vertebrae. There will be 12 vertebrae, and these vertebrae are called the thoracic vertebrae. There are 12 pairs of ribs and their costal cartilages and the sternum, that is forming the thoracic cage. And the shape of the thoracic cage is conical, having a base and apex. And now you know that it has got a inlet superiorly. This is the inlet to the thoracic cavity, and it communicates with the neck. This is the communication with the neck. Then it has got the outlet inferiorly, through which it communicates with the abdomen through an opening in the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is the partition between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So in this picture you could see the inlet of the thorax, outlet of the thorax, and you can see the parts of the sternum, the manubrium, body and xiphoid process, and junction of the manubrium with the body is called the sternal angle, and you are seeing the 12 pairs of ribs with spaces in between them that are called the intercostal spaces. The articulation of rib with the sternum, at that point you are seeing the costal cartilages. Now let us see the thoracic wall. So there are 12 pairs of ribs. The osseous part of thoracic wall is contributed by these 12 pairs of ribs. The ribs are of three types: true ribs, false ribs and floating ribs. So let us see what are true ribs. The anterior ends of these ribs are attached to the sternum through costal cartilages. So that is the thing that will be seen in the first to seventh pair of ribs. The next is the false ribs. Costal cartilages of 8th, 9th, 10th ribs, they end by getting attached to the next higher costal cartilage. That is 10th with the 9th, 9th with the 8th, 8th with the 7th costal cartilages. So these are false ribs. Then there is the floating ribs. The 11th and 12th ribs are short and their lateral ends are free. That's why they are called the floating ribs. So the classification of ribs is into true ribs which get attached to the sternum through costal cartilage, the false ribs which get attached to the next higher cartilage, and then the floating ribs which are free at their lateral ends. So the other contribution for the thoracic wall is the intercostal spaces and their contents. So what will be the contents of intercostal spaces? They are the muscles, vessels and nerves. So here you are seeing the wall, thoracic wall, showing the intercostal spaces. You are seeing the 11 pairs of intercostal spaces between the 12 pairs of ribs. And this is the posterior aspect of the sternum. And this is the diaphragm. And you are seeing the muscles attached to it. Then there will be, you are seeing the vessels and nerves also. What are they? There are 11 pairs of intercostal spaces. So the ribs and costal cartilages of same side are separated by 11 intercostal spaces. What is the content of the intercostal space? So the contents of intercostal spaces are intercostal muscles and their vessels you are seeing and nerves. These spaces are narrow posteriorly but wider anteriorly, with their widest part at the junction of the costochondral. So at costochondral junction they are the widest, whereas they are narrow posteriorly. So the thoracic wall is formed by 12 pairs of ribs and then the intercostal spaces in between the ribs. Now let us see what is this thoracic cavity. So it is a flattened anteroposteriorly. The thoracic cavity is flattened. It has got the narrow inlet and wider outlet. And if you take a cross section, of the thoracic cavity, it will be kidney shaped in the adult, whereas it is circular in the newborn. So the thoracic cavity is flattened anteroposteriorly and it has got a narrow inlet and wider outlet, and the cross section of the thoracic cavity is kidney shaped in the adult and circular in the newborn. What are the contents of the thoracic cavity? What you are seeing is a fetal thoracic cavity. This is the diaphragm and this is the liver in the abdominal cavity you are seeing, and this is the neck region. So this is the thoracic inlet area, this part. And what are the contents of the thoracic cavity? So it is the pleural cavities. So there will be right and left pleural cavities. You are seeing part of the pleura. And then the pericardium. So that will be covering the heart and in the mediastinum. So the pleural cavities on either side, and in the middle is the mediastinum containing the heart enclosed in the pericardium. So what are the organs that are present in the thoracic cavity? You are seeing the heart, and there will be great vessels that are coming out from the heart or entering the heart. That means organs of circulation. Then there is the organs of respiration. So what are those organs you will see? They are the trachea, the bronchi and the lungs. Then part of food passage, that is the esophagus, will be seen. So the contents of the thoracic cavity are the pleural cavity, pericardial cavity, the heart and great vessels that are entering and leaving the heart. Heart is enclosed in the pericardium. Then the organs of respiration, the trachea, bronchi and lungs. Lungs are enclosed in the pleural cavity, and part of food passage, that is the esophagus. So this is the introduction for the thoracic region.